Hello class, welcome to our Kinesiology final. I'm Sarah.
And I'm Erica.
The movement we're doing is a toe touch. These are the different phases of a toe touch.
And this is what a toe touch looks like.
For the first phase is a mini squat down. The joint types and actions are glenohumeral internal rotation and adduction, humeral ulnar flexion in the sagittal plane, patellofemoral flexion, and acetabulofemoral internal rotation.
And so your prime movers, these muscles contract concentrically. This means that the muscle shortens as it contracts. So first you have your semimembranosus, tendinosus, and biceps femoris contracting to flex the knee. And then you have glute medius contracting to internally rotate the hip. You have your brachioradialis contracting to flex the elbow. And then you have your subscapularis and pec major to internally rotate and adduct the shoulder.
Your synergists also contract concentrically. You have your glute minimus and TFL. They help with patellofemoral flexion and hip internal rotation. Brachialis helps with elbow flexion, and anterior deltoid and latissimus dorsi help with glenohumeral internal rotation and adduction.
And so your antagonists, these muscles relax to allow movement. So your quadriceps relax in the order of vastus medialis, vastus intermedius, rectus femoris, and vastus lateralis to allow the knee to flex. And your piriformis relaxes to allow your hip to internally rotate. Your triceps relax to allow your arm to flex. And then your infraspinatus and posterior deltoid relax to allow your shoulder to internally rotate and adduct.
For your stabilizers, they all contract isometrically, which means when they contract, they don't shorten or lengthen, they just stay the same, and they help with movement. Or they don't help with movement, they just hold a joint still. So you have your coracobrachialis, teres major, gastrocnemius, your ankle stabilizers, and your hip stabilizers.
And so for your phase 2, you have your mini squat up. So your joint types and actions would be your glenohumeral joint flexes in the sagittal plane, your humeral ulnar joint extends in the sagittal plane, your patellofemoral joint extends, and there's slight external rotation of the acetabulofemoral joint.
Your prime movers, you have your quadriceps in order of vastus lateralis, rectus femoris, vastus intermedius, and vastus medialis. They help with patellofemoral extension, and your TFL also helps with hip external rotation. Your triceps, they do elbow extension. Your anterior deltoid and pec major do shoulder flexion.
Okay, and for your synergist, you have your glute minimus, which assists in hip external rotation. You have your anconeus, which assists in elbow extension, and you have your coracobrachialis, which assists in shoulder flexion.
For your antagonists, you have your hamstrings in order of biceps femoris, semitendinosus, and semimembranosus, and your hip adductors, longus, magnus, and brevis. They relax to allow your quadriceps and TFL to extend the knee and externally rotate the hip slightly. Your biceps relax to allow for your triceps to extend, and your posterior deltoid and teres major relax to let your anterior deltoid and pec major flex the shoulder.
And so your stabilizers would be your brachioradialis, your psoas, and your glute maximus.
For phase 3, you have your jump preparation. The joint types and actions are patellofemoral flexion, acetabulofemoral internal rotation, glenohumeral extension, humeral ulnar extension in the sagittal plane, and wrist pronation.
And so for your prime movers, you have your hamstrings, which contract in the order of semimembranosus, semitendinosus, and biceps femoris, along with your glute medius. And then you have your pronator teres, which pronates your wrist. And then you have your latissimus dorsi, followed by your posterior deltoid to contract to help with the shoulder internal rotation.
For your synergists, your sartorius and gracilis help your hamstrings flex your knee, and the glute minimus and TFL help with hip internal rotation. Your pronator quadratus helps with wrist pronation, and your teres major helps with shoulder extension.
Okay, for your antagonist, you have your quadriceps, which relax in the order of vastus medialis, vastus intermedius, rectus femoris, and vastus lateralis, which relax to allow your knee to flex. You have your piriformis, which relaxes for your hip to internally rotate. Your supinator relaxes to allow your wrist to pronate. And then your pec major, followed by your anterior deltoid, relax to allow your shoulder to extend.
For your stabilizers, we have the biceps and triceps, gastrocnemius, ankle stabilizers, your psoas, and glute maximus.
Okay, so for phase 4, your jump, your joint types in action, your wrist remains pronated, your glenohumeral joint adducts in the frontal plane, your glenohumeral joint extends in the sagittal plane, your patellofemoral joint extends, and your acetabulofemoral joint abducts and externally rotates.
For your prime movers, we have the deltoid, and it uses all fibers. It does shoulder abduction and extension, glute maximus and piriformis for patellofemoral extension, and glute medius and TFL for hip abduction and external rotation.
And your synergist, your supraspinatus contracts in the first 30 degrees of abduction, and then your obturator internus and externus assist in hip external rotation.
For your antagonists, we have the pec major and latissimus dorsi. They relax to allow for shoulder abduction and extension, and your adductors allow for hip abduction.
And your stabilizers, your biceps and your triceps contract isometrically to keep the elbow extended. The hamstrings and quads contract isometrically to keep the knee extended, and the pronator teres contracts isometrically to maintain a pronated position.
For phase 5, we have the peak of the motion. So for joint types and actions, we have hip abduction in the frontal plane, patellofemoral extension, ankles neutral, glenohumeral abduction in the frontal plane, humeral ulnar extension, wrist pronated, and fingers flexed.
And since you're maintaining this position during the peak, you don't have any prime movers or synergists, and your antagonist would be gravity.
Stabilizers are biceps, triceps, deltoid, pec major, latissimus dorsi, hamstrings, quadriceps, ankle stabilizers, glute maximus, and minimus, and they contract to maintain body position.
Okay, so for phase 6, we have deceleration. Your joint types and actions would be your wrist maintains a pronated position, the glenohumeral joint adducts in the frontal plane, and the acetabulofemoral joint adducts in the frontal plane and is internally rotated.
The prime movers are the pec major, which allows for glenohumeral adduction, and the adductors, longus, magnus, and brevis, to do hip adduction.
And so your synergist would be gravity to help the legs on the way down, and your lats contract to assist in shoulder adduction.
Your antagonists are the deltoid and supraspinatus, which relax to allow the pec major to adduct the shoulder, and gluteus medius and minimus, which relax to allow for hip adduction.
And your stabilizers would be your pronator teres, teres minor, infraspinatus, subscapularis, psoas, and glute maximus.
For phase 7, the landing, you have slight patellofemoral flexion, wrist pronated, glenohumeral adduction in the frontal plane, and ankles neutral.
And so for your prime movers, you have your pec major, which contracts to adduct the shoulder. Your hamstrings contract in the order of semimembranosus, semitendinosus, and biceps femoris to flex the knee. And then your gastroc contracts to allow you to land on the balls of your feet.
Your only synergist is the soleus, and it helps with the gastroc to help you land on the balls of your feet.
And so for your antagonist, your deltoid relaxes to allow your shoulder to adduct. Your quadriceps relax to allow your knee to flex, and then your tibialis anterior and fibularis tertius relax to allow your gastroc and soleus to contract.
Your stabilizers are the pronator teres, teres minor, infraspinatus, subscapularis, tibialis posterior, fibularis longus and brevis, your hip abductors, and your hip adductors.
Okay, and this is a movement analysis using the anterior view.
And here's the lateral view.
Okay, so for your range of motion, the patellofemoral joint flexes for a total range of motion of 54 degrees. The humeral-ulnar joint flexes for a total range of motion of 120 degrees. The glenohumeral joint abducts for a total range of motion of 140 degrees. And the acetabulofemoral joint abducts for a total range of motion of 155 degrees.
This is how the ideal movement should look. And here it is again, just so you can see it clearly.
Okay, so compared to the ideal movement, during the peak phase, her left shoulder is higher than her right shoulder. This can be a sign of overactive upper trapezius on the left side or underactive mid or lower traps on the left side.
To fix this impairment, you could do a myofascial release of the upper trap, so you could foam roll or use a small ball to roll it out. You can static stretch the upper trap with lateral neck bends. Isolated strengthening, you could do rope pulls with scapular retraction, pull-ups with palms facing in, aka chin-ups, and standing Y raises. For total body dynamic strengthening, you could do farmer's walks or single leg Romanian deadlifts.
Okay, and compared to the ideal movement, when she's at her peak phase, she has an excessive forward lead. This means that she could have an overactive hip flexor or an underactive intrinsic core stabilizers.
To fix this impairment, you could do a myofascial release, the hip flexor, so you could foam roll. Static stretching, you could do an assisted hip flexor stretch off the table, or holding foot to glute stretch. Isolated strengthening, you could do planks or lemon squeezer holds. Total body dynamic strengthening, you could do lunges with weight or push up to planks.
Okay, and then compared to the ideal movement, her toes during her peak phase are not pointed. So this could be a sign of overactive tibialis anterior on both sides or underactive soleus on each side.
To fix this impairment, you could do a myofascial release of the tibialis anterior, so you could foam roll. Static stretching, you could do a plantar flex hold with a TheraBand. Isolated strengthening, you could do a seated calf extension or a leg press using the balls of your feet. Total body dynamic strengthening, you could do calf raises or jumping rope while staying on the balls of your feet.
So in conclusion, by following this workout plan, you hope to decrease the amount of dysfunction in the movement and in return will decrease the risk of injury and ultimately increase performance.